Welcome back to the program. Ukraine is prepared to send captured North Korean soldiers home if North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is able to negotiate the release of Ukrainian POWs in Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky was talking about this on January 12th. Now, alternatively, Kiev is willing to explore other options for North Korean soldiers who do not wish to return. Zelensky's remarks came a day after the president announced on January 11th that Ukrainian forces had captured two North Korean POWs in Russia's Kursk Oblast. The wounded soldiers are in the custody of the security service in Ukraine and are reportedly receiving medical attention. Zelensky said via his official Telegram channel on January 12th, in addition to the first captured soldiers from North Korea, there will undoubtedly be others. Joining me now to discuss is a senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute and author of The Iran House, Tales of Revolution, Persecution, War, and Intrigue, Kenneth Zimmerman. Kenneth, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Stacy. It's a pleasure.
I love the work that you're doing at AFPI here, where you're going in and getting actual facts and data that we can trust and rely on as we make decisions about the direction we'd like to see things go in Ukraine. And these new developments point to a cooling off of the tensions, but what's the reality on the ground in Ukraine right now?
Well, my boss at AFPI, General Keith Kellogg, has been named as President Trump's envoy, President-elect Trump's special envoy for the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And he is certainly being kept up to date on this on a daily basis. I expect he will be going to both Kiev and Moscow shortly, most likely after the inauguration. I am not the Ukraine specialist, but I'm certainly, well informed of what's going on. Look, I think Zelensky here is doing what he always does. He's trying to press a bad hand. He's got a bad hand. His troops are losing on the battlefield. The Russians are also losing a tremendous number of troops, but Ukraine has 5 times fewer troops, so they cannot afford to lose as many. So he's now captured two North Koreans, and he's talking about a new negotiation that would include North Korea. I think he's jumping the gun a little bit, but it's typical Zelensky.
It is. I mean, he's not the best option for a wartime president. We don't know a lot about Ukraine when it comes to like their general populace. How many people do they have in their country who are truly top tier and could be on the bench to be their president? We don't have any idea about that, but Zelensky seems to have been the very worst they could have chosen for this. You mentioned General Kellogg, and my time interviewing him in DC and talking with him about national security issues and foreign policy. He's always been very strongly America first, which is a part of the AFPI ethos that you put forward in your work. And so, President Trump has promised to end this war. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think the very first thing is going to be to achieve a ceasefire on the ground. President Trump has said the killing is just unconscionable. There are just so many young people who are losing their lives on the battlefield. Many soldiers on both sides. Hundreds of thousands are being killed and wounded. And President Trump would like to see that end. It's an unnecessary war. This war never had to happen. Obviously, it didn't happen on President Trump's first term, during his first term, and it was brought about, in my view, and I think AFPI has published about this as well, it was brought about really by the Biden administration pushing the envelope and trying to convince Zelensky that the United States was going to reverse 30 years of policy towards Russia, towards NATO, towards those red lines in Europe. And instead of allowing Ukraine to remain as a buffer state, that was in exchange for them giving up their nuclear weapons that they'd inherited from the Soviet Union, we were pushing them and enticing them to join NATO. And everybody knew that was a red line for Russia. It's not a secret. It's not something that was invented by Putin. It's not new. And yet Biden was pushing that. And ultimately, I think that's what triggered the war.
It is. I agree with you, your analysis 100%. In fact, one of the things that's most interesting, if people care to spend time doing it, is you can go online and you can search for President Putin. You can, President Putin on Crimea, President Putin on Ukraine, and you'll find him discussing the situation of that border and his desires, his dealings with America. You'll find him talking about this in speeches and interviews over the past almost 30 years. Like as soon as he came to national prominence in Russia, he began to talk about this. And so he's interested in a certain reality, the one you just described, which is Ukraine as a buffer zone. And the minute Democrat elected presidents here in this country began to flout that, he began to take and annex the surrounding property. It's parts of Ukraine. He took those pieces back because he understood that the agreement wasn't going to be honored. So speaking of, and I'd like to pivot here to your book for a moment, if we can. Your book is called The Iran House: Tales of Revolution, Persecution, War, and Intrigue. Iran has been a terror proxy for all of the modern era, and they plan to do more with that if Kamala Harris was elected. But since the new reality is going to be a Trump White House, do you expect to see President Trump reinstate sanctions that he used effectively against them during his first term?
I think President Trump could very well reimpose the maximum pressure sanctions on day one of his presidency. I know it's something that is being talked about because they worked. When he took office, Iran was exporting 1.5 to 2 million barrels a day of oil. When he left office, it was 400,000 barrels. Since Biden came in, they're now back up to that 1.5, and they've gone on. They're now doing about 2.5 million barrels a day. And that is without getting rid of the congressionally mandated sanctions that sanction the oil industry. So Biden has basically just swept away acts of Congress as well as executive orders and allowed the Iranian regime to earn over $200 billion in extra revenue. This is, by the way, this is a government a GAO estimate recently, $200 billion in extra revenue since Biden has been president. No wonder the Iranian regime has had the money to support terror with Hamas, terror in Lebanon through Hezbollah, terror in Iraq through the Iranian proxy organizations there. I mean, it's just, look, it's amateur hour in the White House. It's been amateur hour for the past 4 years, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or Iran. And I think we are blessed, finally, that the American people have roared to put an end to it.
I think you're so like dead on there when you talk about what the American people want and the impact of Biden's soft on terror policies. His refusal to just keep the sanctions in place. He didn't have to give credit to President Trump for them. He could have done that to protect the lives of military soldiers, which we've lost during President Biden's term. And it's directly connected to terror proxies acting on behalf of Iran. And Iran wouldn't have had the money to do that had they had the maximum pressure sanctions. It's still in place. It's so good to have you here. The book is available wherever books are sold. I like going to Amazon. You are a senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Kenneth Timmerman.
Thank you, Stacy. Thanks for having me. God
All right.
bless.